Greetings, greetings, greetings. You are now watching Black Thought on the M1 Network, and I'm your host, Dr. Hutchinson. So glad to be before you in this way. Thank you for your viewership. We are located here in the great studios of what we commonly refer to and lovingly refer to as the basement in Memphis, Tennessee at the M1 Studios. Again, thank you for being here. First of all, if you're trying to figure out who I am and what I'm about, you're saying, who is this Dr. Hutchinson fellow? Real simple. Go to my website, noelhutchinson.com. noelhutchinson.com. There you will learn more about me. Let me not take up the time with focusing about me or getting into what I've done, but let me get to the matter at hand. Many of you watching this have heard some news that came out of Memphis last Wednesday. Matter of fact, last Wednesday night to be specific. You heard about what happened in the Memphis community of Frasyer. There was a young man, Brandon Weber, 20 years old, who was gunned down, and that's what it was, by the U.S. Marshals. I believe it was in front of his home. Some news reports have said that he took a car and rammed the U.S. Marshals cars, and he brandished a rifle. And after those proceedings, the U.S. Marshals shot him 16 times, rather. And then there are some accounts that have said, especially from some neighborhood people, that there was no car, there was no rifle, and that he was just shot down in the yard. Some have said he had handcuffs on, some have said he did not have handcuffs on. But the bottom line is the details around his shooting are murky, and U.S. Marshals do not have body cams either on their person or in their cars. So a lot of this is word of mouth, cannot be verified. Then after young Mr. Weber was shot and killed, the community came out, they were upset, and they showed their frustration in throwing rocks at the gathered forces of NPD, the Memphis Police Department. They were asked to be there to cordon off the area and secure the area where Mr. Weber was shot so that forensics could be done. So they were there. They did not, let me emphasize, not shoot Brandon Weber. They were there to cordon off the area, and I believe just also to keep things calm. But they quickly became much less than calm, for rocks were thrown. If I heard correctly, there was a wall by a business that was torn down. That was probably where they got the rocks from. And it was also said that a lot of the windows, and not all the windows, on the fire precinct right in that block were destroyed. Those are the things that we know. Let me add one other piece. It is said that young Mr. Weber, with an accomplice, went down to Mississippi and, under the guise of buying an automobile, carjacked the gentleman, and it was said that allegedly Mr. Weber shot the owner of the car 5 times and left him for dead, hence the involvement of the U.S. Marshals. There are some who have said that this was a case of mistaken identity, for it was not Mr. Weber. Others cite his Facebook page, in which he allegedly said, "You're not going to take me alive," as evidence as to why the U.S. Marshals should have done what they did. Let me say this. We as people of African descent are not monolithic. In other words, we don't think the same, we don't act the same, and even some of you, after what I've said, realize we don't process information the same. I also understand that based upon some of the things that I'm getting ready to say, you may already form some opinions of what I may be thinking and what side I'm on. I'm going to try as clearly as possible to share with you my observations, and they're based on several things. First of all, yes, I've heard the media reports. Yes, I also know people that have been involved in the proceedings. Yes, I know people that know the family well and have talked to the family, and I've had conversations with them. And yes, I've had other conversations where I won't reveal the confidential nature of the conversations, but suffice to say, I've gotten some credible information. So with that, let me emphasize two things to you. We may disagree on a lot of things. You may not affirm some of what I'm about to say, but there, I think, are at least two things on which we can probably agree. The first thing is the media has portrayed this as a riot because Memphis PD used tear gas to disperse the crowd. Now, some of my activist friends may disagree with me because Memphis PD had the shields up, they had the batons, and those things in and of themselves probably were irritants to the crowd. I agree with you. But I'll say this. Memphis Police Department practiced some restraint that day in how they responded to what they saw on the scene. You may not agree, but I'll tell you that it could have been a lot worse. That's the point I'm trying to make. It may not have been what you and I think it should have been, but it could have been a lot worse. So on that train, let me say this. There was not a riot that day. That was not a riot. That was a disturbance, but it wasn't a riot. Understand what a riot is. A riot tears up a community. This was localized to maybe a block and a half. A riot disrupts commerce. A riot is where you have the paddy wagon active and people go to jail. A riot is so disruptive that days and even weeks after it takes place, it's a challenge for the community to get back to normal. Let me share with you what a riot looks like. What happened in Baltimore, even though it was borderline, you remember when Freddie Gray was arrested and what happened after that when he died? That was a riot. The only reason I say borderline, it wasn't the type of uprising or riot in the tone of some of the others that have happened in our history in this country. But you could call that a riot. You definitely could call what happened in the aftermath of Rodney King and the officers that beat him, their acquittal, a riot. Some call it an uprising. But the bottom line is, stores were destroyed, the community was uprooted. That's a riot. What happened after the death of Martin Luther King in cities all over this country? Riots. And there are other instances that I could cite. This was a disturbance. See, what you have to understand is we live in an era, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but you have what's called eyewitness news, where if it leads, it bleeds. So every little thing is hyped. So if you get a paper cut in the wrong way, it's hyped. Or to say it a different way, in a market like this, sometimes you get sensationalist news that doesn't even happen in this area, but it's cited either in print or elsewhere as if it happened right here. So understand that perspective. So yes, there was a disturbance. Yes, people were upset. And we need really as a community to investigate the why people were upset. No, this wasn't just some hooligans that use an excuse to tear up stuff. That's not what this was. But this was people tired about things that they were seeing, and what happened to this young man just exacerbated those problems. Now, you may disagree. That's fine. But I'm trying to show you the evidence of why you saw what you saw. We've had all kinds of things happen in terms of the police and in terms of people of color. And people are tired. Now, some of you say, well, let me not go there yet. Let me get to my next point. Then I can add this in. Here's the next point. Brandon Weber should have been taken alive, locked up, and it should have been a court of his peers to decide whether he was innocent or guilty. He shouldn't have died in front of his folks' house or in that general vicinity in Frasyer. That should not have happened. Now, let me slow down. Some of you that are watching this saying, yeah, he should have died. Look at his Facebook page. Yeah, he should have died. He shot that man in cold blood. Yeah, he should have died. Well, understand that I'm not in support of criminality. Let's get that straight. So if he's guilty, or if he was guilty, he deserves to go to jail. If he's guilty. I don't know if he's guilty. And to tell the truth of the matter, you don't know either. So if he's guilty, he ought to go to jail. But here's where the problem comes in. And you can see this as documentation across this country. When it comes to black men dealing with this justice system, we tend to get tried on the curbside instead of in the court. And that's wrong. We are celebrating the anniversary, the 5-year anniversary of Dylan Roof going in that church in Charleston and killing 9 people. What happened? They found him. They didn't shoot him in cold blood. And when they were taking him to jail, he said, I'm hungry, and they stopped by Burger King. Now, when's the last time you ever heard of Pookie and Ray Ray getting an escort at the McDonald's to eat before they go to jail? See, that's what I'm talking about. Let's look at the evidence. Some of y'all say Brandon Weber was guilty. Okay. Brandon Weber didn't make it to court, didn't make it to jail. Dylan Roof, he was guilty. He made it to court. I'm just using him as one example. Now, let me share with you a conversation that I had with a fairly famous Memphis journalist. I won't tell you his name because this was kind of off the record conversation, and I'll share it in this way because this will not point back to him. Yesterday, I was at the vigil that Micah sponsored, where the clergy gathered in lament over the loss of Brandon Weber. And be clear, I grieve also for the young man that was shot 5 times. And the carjacking that he had to endure. That wasn't right. So please don't get the what if in your mind. What about him? He is important as well. But we're raising this issue because out of this issue has come some things that need to be addressed. That needs to be addressed too, and that needs to be addressed in a court of law. But if Brandon Weber did it, we can no longer address it because he's not here. So anyway, I was at this meeting and I ran across this reporter. We know each other. So we were sitting down talking, and he said to me, and I already knew this, that you have law enforcement that goes across jurisdictions all the time, because these U.S. Marshals that came to get Brandon Weber came from Mississippi, and it was said they came from the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. So that's roughly about 400 miles from here. So you have this type of cross current all the time. And you have it where law enforcement, local law enforcement is notified so that you're able to catch people and take them away without fanfare. Memphis PD didn't know what was going on until they got the call, from my understanding, to cordon off this area. If they really wanted to capture Brandon Weber, they could have done it in such a way where the neighborhood would barely know what's going on. And he'd be in jail right now, if that was their intent. This is what a reporter in the know said to me. So for all of you who want to get Sunday school and say that he lived by the sword, he died by the sword, I get that, but you're missing the point. Why is it that black folk don't make it to court? Why? Why is it that we get tried on the sidewalk in blood? Why? Why is it, and I do this all the time, why is it if I get pulled over by the police, I'm putting my hands on the steering wheel, and if it's at night, I'm turning on all the lights in the car, and when the officer asks for my driver's license and registration, I have to tell him or her it's in my right pocket, or it's in my left pocket, or it's in my back pocket. Can I go and retrieve it? Because 9 times out of 10, they're walking up to the car with their hand on their gun. Now, I understand they want to go home and be safe. But now, if I don't comport myself in a certain way, I'm not talking even about being belligerent. I'm talking about taking precautions so that they're clear that I'm not adversarial. If I don't do that, I might run into a problem. Don't understand? Ask Philandro Castile. And y'all, this was on Facebook Live. His fiance posted it. The officer stopped him. He was in the passenger seat. When the officer stopped him, Castile said, "I'm a licensed gun owner and I have a gun." The officer asked him, if I remember correctly, for ID. And when he was getting it, he wasn't touching his gun. I don't even know if it was on him. It might have just been in the car. The officer shot him. And it was proven he wasn't pulling out his gun. So y'all, that's the point. We're not saying that Brandon Weber was a choir boy. I don't know. We're not saying he didn't deserve to go to jail. I don't know. We're not saying that he didn't do the crime. I don't know. But what I am saying is it's time out for this unequal treatment. If you do the crime, you ought to go before the judge, and the judge ought to sentence your butt to jail. not the job of law enforcement to be judge and jury. This is almost like going old school, back to those mock trials, when they caught a brother under Jim Crow days and they said the brother might have raped a white woman, or the brother might have stolen something, or the brother may have talked out of turn. Then they have a trial just to say they did right, and then they abscond him from the jail and hang him out in the woods somewhere. But see, in the 21st century, they can't finagle the judges the way they used to, so they cut out the middleman. They just shoot him right there on the curb. And that's why people are upset, because they see this inequity each and every day. They see the harassment of innocent citizens each and every day. And let me finally end by saying this. Look this up for yourself. Look at the responses of our politicians. Look at the response of Mayor Strickland. Look at the response of Marsha Blackburn. Look at a couple other responses. In no place do they mention the family of Brandon Weber or mention him at all. They just say law enforcement did a good job and we're sorry that they had to go through these changes. Bottom line. They don't mention the angst in the community. And if they do mention it, they basically say code words for Negroes, you ought to behave yourselves. Now there's a letter from a mayor in Arizona where I think an incident happened where there was a gun pulled on a mother and her children. And she was affirming both of law enforcement and also that situation with the mother and child, and said she would get to the bottom of it through the various agencies that are, including law enforcement, that are attached to her city. See, that's how you have responsible responses to what's happening. And somebody, even after watching this, still not going to get it. They're going to say, I'm affirming the person that's wrong. No, I'm not. You didn't listen to what I said. You're saying that the folks should have rioted. They didn't riot. They caused a disturbance. But no, I'm not. I'm not affirming that. I'm explaining to you why it happened. Now, maybe if some of the issues had been addressed before that they had, this wouldn't have happened. Maybe if they had coordinated better with MPD and been on the mission to capture him and not kill him, then maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I hope you get it. In many ways, black life is just as cheap as it was when Emmett Till was killed. But then I hear somebody else saying, well, what about all this black on black crime? First of all, let me help you understand it. Crime is a function of location, which is a function of proximity. We live in a segregated society. So when black folk commit crime, they're going to commit crime against those who live around them. White folk do the same thing. About 86% of white people commit crime against white people. But we don't hear about the white-on-white crime epidemic, do we? I guess what you're saying, and I do understand it, is with all the things that we have to deal with, we're killing each other over stupidity. I don't disagree, but there are so many organizations, nonprofits, Greek orders, Masonic orders, churches that are trying to address that situation. And that's a longer term situation. and that's a mentorship situation, and that's a getting out in the street and putting their hands on people's situation. That's not the same as a crisis situation that's presented to you in this way. So understand the difference. Thirdly, folk that bring that up, most of the time, y'all are doing nothing in your community. You're Monday morning quarterbacking and waiting for somebody else to do it. Well, what about the black on black crime? Okay, if you're so interested in that, what are you doing about it? Oh, I hear the crickets chirping right now. All right, so summation, then I'm out your way. First of all, it wasn't a riot, it was a disturbance. I kind of explained that. Second of all, not disputing the innocence or guilt of Brandon Weber, but he should have been afforded what's afforded to some of these mass murderers, some of these people that are involved in school shootings, some of these people like Dylan Roof who've come in our neighborhoods and killed us up. He should have been afforded the same privilege and taken to jail and have to go before his peers instead of being killed. And it seems that too often we don't get looked upon the same, even the victims of crime. When you look at, for example, when we're victimized or when we're shot by the police, right? Then all of a sudden the media wants to go into our background. Now look, the officer, and it's only 10% of the officers that are rogue, by the way, but the officers walking around here in the land of the living, this person's dead, and now we're going to talk about they stole some chiclets when they were 10 years old. Now what the heck does that have to do with them being shot yesterday? That's how we treat black victims. And that's how we view us. And life is more complex than just black and white. It's a series of gray. You can be excellent in school, yet have some discrepancies in your character. You could be flunking out of school, but yet be a genius in some other areas. But the bottom line is, he deserved to be tried by his peers. And if he was guilty, then you could send him to jail. But we'll never know. Some accounts say that they were really looking for his dad and not him. His dad was the guilty one. That's what some folks say. I don't know. But the bottom line is, we won't have those conversations. Because the body was released to the family on Friday. And now they're in the process of working with a funeral home to have a funeral for Brandon Weber. That's what they're dealing with right now. Media, everybody and their mamas trying to converge on the house to talk to the mother. And the mother, because of all this attention, doesn't know at some points whether she's coming or going. It's not that she can't cope, but folk are just pressing her. So I want y'all to think about what I said. Don't twist it up. Don't say that I'm supporting criminality. I'm not. Don't say I'm supporting rioters. I'm not. I'm just explaining to you the nuances of this and the things that you ought to look at. All right, I've taken up enough of your time. Think about what I've said. Brother, man, sister, woman, young boy, young girl. Put your mind in gear. Put your thinking cap on. Peace.